Welcome back to the Climate Playbook series. This is episode 1, and the title of this episode is The Ideal Process. We'll be going through the ideal process as a background and as a prelude before we get into what brings about a system and balance to our cognitive device. I just want to have an overview of the last video for today's agenda and to start today's agenda. And also I want to go through a housekeeping item, which is a clarification and a definition of the term that we'll be using, which is salience. We'll be looking at the fruits of the tree that I mentioned in the introduction and the overview video. And then we'll be looking at how to organize the fruits of the tree, where we can see how they work together like musicians in a band, having a common goal, and how we can break frame, then seeing them as individual fruits that are not tied together to the same tree. And lastly, we'll talk about how this perfect process, or this ideal process, ties into the analogous model that I illustrated in the previous video. So with that, let's go to the housekeeping. And the term that I want to just unpack a little bit and get us familiar. And again, this is not an in-depth, all-inclusive definition of the word, but it's a good start so that we can move through this video series in a way that gives us a sense of coherence and logical framing. The word I want to work on is salience. And salience in this definition is a subjective, which is our own individual state or quality by which we perceive something that stands out from its neighbors. And this typically arises in a contrast between items and their neighborhood. So for instance, this word salience is black against a somewhat off-white background. It stands out from it. So an example, it would be like a red dot surrounded by white dots. So that would make it stand out. And salience, in my understanding, is highly contextual. We could be looking for something, we will zone into that particular feature, and that's the feature that we pick out. And the times that we're not looking for something, that context drops away, and therefore that feature drops away with that context. So the feature list of salience is that it's a foreground process. It's a process that we hold in mind. It's not backgrounded like brushing teeth, for instance. You're 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you don't remember how long you took to brush your teeth or how many strokes it takes to brush your teeth. It's held in mind, so it's occupying a lot of cognitive energy. It's typically goal relevant, and I was mentioning to you that we don't look for a feature unless it's useful to solve a problem. So we don't look for our keys until we want to drive our car. And to bring it all together, this is my way of synthesizing it. It's worthy to be kept in mind so as to go after the benefit. And then the rest of this is related to our topic here, which is the Climate Playbook, without experiencing the conflict that it produces, in which case it's usually in harm. So I look at salience as also the spotlight, which is, you can imagine like a territory, where you expand the spotlight to pick up the many features on the territory, and also the focus, where you can focus in, you can focus out, and you might see a country if you focus in, but when you focus out, you see a continent. So there are some features to salience that way. So as I was mentioning, territory, if you focus in on this, you see a beak. But then when you open up, you say, hey, a forehead, a crown, nape, and so on, and these are all the features of a bird. So that's one level of looking at salience. But then you ask yourself, going back to this feature list, if I put together a beak from one species, an eyes from one species, a wing from another species, a claw from another species, do I get a bird? And if we are stuck on that level of just that feature list, we do not get this effect, which is a flying bird. So we also have to look from another level, I call it, a topography or a panoramic view, how we can get this bird effect, or they call it gestalt, or in the words of cognitive science, structural functional organization, where the bird has to operate from all these features within its own self. It cannot be cobbled up from another species, another species, another species. So it constrains us to say we have to pretty much pick up all these features on that same bird in order to get a flying bird. So we can go to the next level on salience, where we go into this, where that one bird that we looked at could be this one tiny dot. And we have all these quote-unquote features, or we have all these birds as feature points to this bigger organism or bigger effect, combinative effect, which creates this rather spectacular outline of a bird. I think this was a fluke picture, a bird that that's made out of the individual birds. So when I was going through the various papers on understanding climate inaction, and I call them the fruits of the tree, and that was what we used as the analogy in the previous video. I wanted to see how we can tie them so that they all are speaking from the same source. So this is the range of frameworks that I looked at, and I will be providing a link in the description of the video so that you can access what are those papers that provided me with those 10 fruits. So in reading all those papers, I came up with 10 types of filtering that we filter out climate change so that we can go about with our lives without feeling the harmful effects of it psychologically. And I looked at the listing of these 9 papers to get those 10 fruits. However, I found that I needed to get into this aspect, which is a convergence. How do they all come together in this higher level place, like those birds right here? How do they come into this particular combinative effect that came from the individual papers? And I, to be honest with you, I got really frustrated because I got stuck in some ways. I was looking at each individual paper as a feature, like the murmuration feature, and started diving into it. I got caught in a silo effect, and I just felt there was a sinking feeling about it. I didn't particularly dig myself out of it until later, and this feature that and this paper that afforded me this murmuration effect, I'll discuss it. But let's go through the top 5 filters that we filter out climate change. The first one is not close, immediate, and real. You could see here is a picture of the Amazon burning in Brazil. But right here, this is what grabs our attention and grabs us to act on, which is a fire on a grill, and this person is putting it out. So this is what pulls us into action, but this may not necessarily pull us into action because it's not seen as immediate, It's burning far away, so it's not close. And it doesn't seem real, I would should say, as putting out a fire on a barbecue. The next type 2, is doom. And here you have a picture of a man just missing his train, but he valiantly tries to chase it down. And then you have here the icebergs melting. So doom is a sense that it's too late to do anything meaningful about climate change. The third one is dissonance. And dissonance is a conflict with the accepted norms, rules, and patterns found on the interpersonal between people and on the cultural and on the institutional level. And here we have a person that's acting against the group norms, rules, and patterns and is being shunned away, which is a very deep sense of loss, disorientation. And then you have Greta Thunberg here, and she is asking us to act on the climate, which means we will have to act against those norms, rules, and patterns. The type 4 resistance is denial, and we have here is protesters, and they love that carbon dioxide. And here we have the effects of melting ice and what it does to polar bears. So in denial, it attempts to undermine the legitimacy, the credibility, and the impact of climate change. And lastly, we have identity. And in identity, we can see right here is a chart that brings us to 2020, this year, and the blue is Democratic line and the Republican line is here, and it shows us as we're warming up, there are concerns that are the Democrats are getting more interested or being concerned with climate change much faster than Republicans. And here is just a picture of a mansion that has to be moved because this is the coastline behind it, and it is creeping up and flooding or causing problems with erosion and potential flooding to that mansion. So in identity, and it's a little bit complicated, but there is a sense of a deference to a referent group, a group that carries our beliefs, carries our sense of identity, a sense of orientation, especially towards complex, anonymous, and indirect threats. So an example, if somebody yells fire, and I believe there's a study that shows that rather than look for smoke, we look into each other's facial cues and body cues to understand, is the threat real and direct and imminent? So in this very wordy chart, we have type 1, not close, real, immediate, doom, dissonance, denial, and identity. But let's take a look at it in a different way, in a more salient way. Here is a NASCAR jacket, and we have those pictures that I pointed out. We'll use them as NASCAR badges. They are icons, you could say. So we have the first one, not close, real, and immediate. And then we have doom, right here, the person chasing the train. And then we have dissonance, where the person is being ousted from the group for acting against their interests. And we have denial, person that loves the CO2. And lastly, identity. So when I was working with this, I was trying to wrap my mind, how do they work with each other? How do they conspire towards a greater combination effect, a greater murmuration like those birds are? And actually, to be honest with you, I got into this Frankensteinian mess. I wasn't able to build the bird because they all were pieces from different species. And I got stuck in that way. As a result of that, I felt that I was circling in the airport I was on a plane, not knowing it was circling in the airport. And then the pilot announces, "Ladies and gentlemen, we just turned off the seatbelt sign, and please feel free to use the bathroom." And on the way to the bathroom, I noticed that I was on the plane that was still circling the same airport that it took off from. So after working a few blogs, I discovered a paper that was crucial for me to tie in all these sponsor badges in a way that made sense, that brought me this memorization effect. And the authors of this paper, Bastian and Lofnan, in 2016. And again, I'll add a blog link that would provide you with the citation. And the paper they had authored was called The Meat Paradox. And it's about how people maintain their equanimity in eating meat while simultaneously bearing the harm. So rather than have this silo effect where you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you could see on this NASCAR jacket, all these corporations really don't work with each other in this combination, on this higher combinative effect. We have an ecology of filters, or ecology of resistance. And this is a pit crew right here, where you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are working towards this car, ensuring that it is in the physical condition to perform in an expected way. So this was very interesting for me, because it really shifted me from this silo lens where you're looking at the individual filters and individual traits and then working and understanding what's behind it, to understanding how they work towards this combination effect. And from that moral paradox paper, I got to see what happens in the ideal process, where the person in this car represents the equanimity of that person, arriving and managing to complete the act of their appetite, and in the process grab the flags that certifies them as saying, "I have done no harm, I'm not personally responsible for my actions," and then finally, I have an identity that places me as a morally fit member of society. So the pit crew here is working together so that equanimity is intact, is unchallenged, so as to fulfill this appetitive goal and not trigger these 3 triggers. To conclude, I want to just tie it in to the ideal process. And here in the ideal process, this is where the appetite is happening. But at the same time, we have the aspirational side that is connected to it. So any growth, which is the increase in salience on the appetite, increases our checks and balances so that we do not go into harm, we are personally responsible, and also we ensure that we have a moral ideal that's held within ourselves and held within society, that is enacted and is actualized. So that's the perfect process with these outer constraints, where as this thing grows, it has pressure that makes this grow, and that puts a tensive force between them so that none of these things run away. So as I roll out these videos, and this is episode 1 and episode 2, I'll give it a week or so between videos. Please like the videos and subscribe to the channel, and also post any questions or comments so that in that week I have time to respond to them and give any more clarification that this 15-minute or so video is unable to do. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll see you in episode 2, and please like the video and subscribe to the channel.